Thank you, Shata, and good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tout le monde. And welcome to this press conference on the campus of University of Toronto, which is actually, I'm an alumni of this great university, so I'm always happy to be able to visit again. My name is Julie Dabrusin. As you heard, I am the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. And today, I'm going to be your MC for this announcement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples who've walked these lands before us, including the Wendat, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee people, the Anishinaabe people, more recently the Mississaugas of the Credit, with whom we have a treaty, Treaty 13, and we continue to be home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And I always try and take a moment whenever I say that, because that's not just a check mark in the introductions here. It's a very important part of what our lands are and our obligations going forward to these lands continue to be. So I'd like to thank all of you for taking some time to join us for this announcement today. Et je voudrais également vous remercier tous d'avoir pris le temps d'être présents pour cette annonce passionnante. So to give the announcement today, I want to introduce you to someone who I have had the chance to get to know, working alongside him for the past couple of years, someone who has experience and a past of advocacy for cleaner energy, for fighting climate change, and supporting our environment. Did it at Greenpeace, at Équiterre, and then he went on to become our Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Depuis qu'il a lancé le plan canadien de réduction des émissions, qui engage le Canada à réduire ses émissions de 40 à 45% par rapport au niveau de 2005 d'ici à 2030 et à parvenir à des émissions nettes nulles d'ici à 2050. Il a également mené la charge lors de la COP 15 à Montréal pour établir le cadre mondial pour la biodiversité. Et plus récemment, nous avons lancé la stratégie nationale d'adaptation du Canada. Together with our entire Liberal caucus 2 years ago, we both committed to building a net zero electricity grid across Canada by 2035. It was incredibly ambitious, but it's also an achievable commitment. Since then, I have been across Canada in my dual role as Parliamentary Secretary to both ministers, and had that chance to talk with energy experts from utilities, workers in power stations, and Canadians who are concerned about the impacts that energy sources have on the health of ourselves and on our planet. I've heard many about the challenges involved in getting to a net zero electricity grid, making sure we can keep rates affordable while ensuring the reliability of our grid. But at the same time, I've seen amazing innovation and people working towards creative solutions that are right here, right now in our country, including nuclear reactor designs of all sizes, battery storage, pump storage solutions. They're all being built across Canada right now. Most importantly, we've heard experts from coast to coast to coast saying unequivocally that a net zero grid isn't just achievable, but that it's necessary in order to drive economic growth and enable significant emissions reductions in all areas of our economy. So without further ado, I am really excited to be able to introduce to the podium someone who is going to give us some news about really exciting progress on his file, the Honourable Steven Guilbeault, Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Julie. Merci beaucoup. And thank you, Shata, and to the University of Toronto for your kind words of encouragement. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. A special welcome to guests who will be joining us soon, Evan from Clean Energy Canada and Vittoria from the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. This is an exciting day. Today, Canada is taking a giant step forward in our fight against climate change and our support for clean, affordable, competitive economy. But before I elaborate on that, I want to recognize all the people involved in Climate Positive Energy Research Day here at the University of Toronto. I'm thrilled to see so many creative and innovative ideas on display here today. Keep them coming. Because to reach net zero by 2050, we will need your energy and creativity. We need your innovation research. We need your ideas in groundbreaking, society-changing technologies. It is events like these that keep inspiring youth to continue to develop their skills and expand their knowledge so that they can participate in the move towards a more sustainable future. All of us need to play a role in building the future we want to see. A future where energy is clean, affordable, and reliable. A future where we can generate good jobs without creating greenhouse gas pollution. At the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, the Prime Minister committed to a net zero electricity grid by 2035. Since then, every other G7 country has made a similar commitment. Because all major economies recognize that developing a clean electricity system is the foundation needed to decarbonize transportation, buildings, and industrial processes by 2050. In fact, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau agreed last April to release clean electricity regulations by this fall. And just like the United States, we're following through on this commitment. That's why I'm pleased to announce that we're releasing the draft Clean Electricity Regulation, part of our government's comprehensive plan to develop a clean, affordable, and reliable electricity grid, and ultimately to build a brighter future for generations of Canadians. Why do we want to build a cleaner grid? Let me give you 3 reasons. 1, to tackle climate change. Phasing down unabated fossil fuel power plants will cut hundreds of millions of tons of pollution that is hurting our communities. 2, to become an engine of prosperous net zero economy. Canada already has a big head start with a grid that is almost 85% clean. Meeting the growing demand for electricity with clean technologies represents an enormous economic opportunity for Canada and Canadians. And 3, to help Canadians spend less money on energy. Shifting to clean electricity saves households on their energy bills, away from the shocks of yo-yoing gas and oil prices. These regulations are a crucial step, yes, but they alone won't get us to that vision. To get there, we all need to work together. And the Government of Canada is coming to the table like never before with a range of investment to help. As my friend and colleague, Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, stated 2 days ago, when he released the Government of Canada's vision for clean electricity, Canada is embarking on a major, transformative nation-building project that will pay dividends for decades to come. The federal, provincial, and territorial governments, Indigenous governments, utilities, private sector, trade unions, experts, environmental organizations, and all Canadians, we all have an important role and shared responsibility in this national endeavor. This kind of cooperation is already happening. Think of the Oneida Energy Storage Project right here in Ontario. The 6 nations of the Grand River, private industry, the governments of Canada and Ontario, all working hand in hand on the largest battery storage project in the country. C'est donc un grand plaisir pour moi d'annoncer aujourd'hui la publication de notre projet de règlement qui soutiendra notre vision nationale d'un réseau électrique propre, abordable et fiable d'ici 2035. Le règlement donnera un signal clair au marché pour qu'il investisse davantage dans les énergies qui n'émettent pas de gaz à effet de serre. Je pense surtout à l'énergie éolienne et solaire, à de nouvelles connexions régionales, à des interconnexions apportant une énergie propre et fiable partout au Canada, à de l'hydrogène vert, à des réseaux intelligents et au stockage de l'énergie. Le Canada peut réussir. Après tout, près de 85% de notre électricité provient déjà de sources propres telles que l'hydroélectricité, l'énergie éolienne et l'énergie solaire. Les technologies existent et les avantages sont énormes. Avec les feux de forêt et les vagues de chaleur qui battent des records, des phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes et des inondations ici et partout dans le monde, la réalité des changements climatiques s'impose à nous tous et toutes. La réduction de la pollution carbone créera un environnement plus sain qui protégera mieux nos terres, nos eaux, nos populations et notre biodiversité. Let's reflect on the year we're having. Record heat month after month around the world. record ocean temperatures, record wildfires in all parts of Canada and around the world this year. Cutting carbon pollution means easing up on the gas pedal that's driving these damaging and costly impacts. By taking action is not only the responsible thing to do from a climate and air pollution perspective, it is also taking advantage of generational economic opportunity. It will create good middle-class jobs to retrofit existing power plants and buildings and to build out new sources of electricity. That's why we see labor groups coming out in favor of building a cleaner grid, because they see the potential for their workers. Clean electricity will also help make Canada more competitive. More and more companies are searching for clean, affordable, and reliable power. We want them to plug into Canada. When Volkswagen was asked why it chose Ontario for its new EV battery plant, Volkswagen emphasized that the availability of clean electricity was a key factor in that decision. That investment alone is expected to create 3,000 jobs, direct jobs, and thousands more in spin-offs. We need to build on these successes right across the country. The government of Ontario is right when it says the future is electric. I couldn't agree more. Bien entendu, l'énergie propre n'est pas seulement avantageuse pour les grandes entreprises. Elle est également intéressante pour les petites entreprises et les propriétaires. Une étude récente de l'Institut du climat du Canada a montré que le passage à l'électricité propre pourrait réduire les coûts énergétiques des ménages canadiens de 12% d'ici 2050. Cela même après avoir investi dans des équipements tels que les thermopompes pour le climat froid. Le passage du mazout aux thermopompes peut permettre aux propriétaires moyens d'économiser jusqu'à 4 700 $ sur ses coûts énergétiques. Ce message est en train de passer. En Europe, l'an dernier, les ventes de thermopompes ont augmenté de 40%. Et aux États-Unis, les ventes de thermopompes dépassent celles des appareils de climatisation. Si le Canada veut de l'électricité propre pour alimenter les thermopompes, les véhicules électriques et tant d'autres technologies de pointe, et pour faire face à l'augmentation de la population, une plus grande capacité énergétique sera nécessaire. Now we know the scale of the challenge ahead of us, and I know some will cast doubt on the challenge, arguing that we would be better off sticking to the status quo. I would say that these regulations have been carefully designed following intense consultations to maximize the reduction of carbon pollution while still providing a reliable, affordable grid. They ensure flexibility and a technologically neutral approach with lots of time for electricity systems across the country to adjust. By regulating these change in the decision-making now, we can ensure polluting power plants can be phased down over 20 years while allowing them to run where they have the greatest value for keeping electricity affordable and reliable. And we recognize Canada is a vast and remote country. Some communities aren't on the main grid and don't have the same opportunities for low-emitting technologies. These regulations account for them too. But perhaps, most importantly, keeping electricity rates affordable across the country is at the core of this vision, so that there are only minimal impacts felt over a decade from now. In reality, without these regulations, provincial utilities will still need to invest at least $400 billion by 2050 for ongoing maintenance and to build out the electricity grid to meet the growing demand that comes from population and economic growth, and demand that is set to increase as more and more Canadians use electric cars and heat pumps, and industry relies on cleaner power. So the obvious question is, why not make sure that this build-out is clean and affordable? The federal government has made available over $40 billion to enable provinces and utilities to invest in clean electricity over the next 10 years. This includes measures like the new investment tax credit of 15% for non-emitting electricity generation, $10 billion in low-cost financing from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank for clean electricity projects, and $5 billion in new funding for the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways program. We estimate that if provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners take full advantage of these measures, the federal government will offset more than half of provinces and territories' cost of cleaning the grid, reducing the direct cost to ratepayers. Let me repeat that. New federal investments in clean grid could amount to over half the investment cost provinces would be paying for a cleaner grid. Our investment in a net zero electricity grid will pay huge dividends in avoided climate change damage, reduce air pollution, and lower energy cost. How much? We estimate net benefit of close to $29 billion by 2050. $29 billion, which includes the savings that electricity generators will save from no longer paying for fuel. Bien sûr, il y aura toujours des gens qui diront que nous ne pouvons pas arriver à accomplir tout cela. Mais au cours de l'année écoulée, des experts, comme l'ensemble de la population canadienne, nous ont dit que cela était possible. En fait, selon un récent sondage Abacus, 71% de la population canadienne se dit favorable à une réglementation fédérale sur l'électricité propre. Grâce à l'électricité propre, nous pouvons lutter contre les changements climatiques, protéger notre environnement, réduire les coûts énergétiques pour les consommateurs et stimuler la croissance économique. Le Canada a déjà pris des mesures concrètes sur tous ces fronts. Le moment est venu de passer à l'étape suivante. We're already consulted extensively with industry, labor, experts, provinces and territories, Indigenous organizations, and utilities. This engagement has helped us design the proposed regulations so that they place reliability and affordability at the heart of the transition to a net zero grid. The regulations are draft. We look forward to continuing our extensive consultations to ensure we get this right, because the health of our communities, our economy, and our planet depend on it. Friends, this is the spark to get us to net zero. Let's all take up the challenge. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And now at this time, I'd like to invite Vittoria Bellissimo from CanREA to deliver brief remarks.
Thank you, merci. Hello, everyone, bonjour. My name is Vittoria Bellissimo, and I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. CanREA is the voice for the wind energy, solar energy, and energy storage solutions that will power Canada's energy future. CanREA is devoted to advancing renewable energy and energy storage in this country with the goal of moving Canada towards its 2050 net zero targets. When we published our 2050 vision document, Powering Canada's Journey to Net Zero, a couple of years ago, it defined a to-do list that will enable Canada to get to net zero. Task number one on our to-do list was to have Canada put in place foundational measures to enable the decarbonization of electricity production by 2035. And that's why I am so pleased to be here today for the federal government's announcement of the Clean Electricity Regulations. These regulations will result in a net zero electricity grid by 2035 by creating a clear market signal for the further deployment of renewable electricity from coast to coast to coast. They will spur significant new investments in Canada, and this will translate into increased economic opportunities for Indigenous communities and companies like the Bécancour Wind Project. This project is a 200 megawatt facility in Saskatchewan, built through a partnership between the Cowessess First Nation and Renewable Energy Systems. To most of my members, working with Indigenous peoples and businesses is the business model. Our industry is based on partnerships with Indigenous peoples. As a pan-Canadian member association, CanREA is happy to see that these draft regulations set the destination, net zero, but let provinces and companies pick their path to get there. This is an exciting moment for the renewable energy industry in Canada. CanREA has long been calling for a massive increase in the deployment of new wind energy, solar energy, and energy storage technologies. Getting to net zero will require Canada to install more than 5,000 megawatts of new wind and solar annually between now and 2050. These technologies will need to provide 2/3 of the electricity required to decarbonize the economy in the coming decades. Why are they the solution? Because they work, because they are ready today, and because they are the most affordable way to meet Canada's net zero targets. And to achieve these goals, we need to remove barriers to the development of a thriving, sustainable, renewable energy and storage industry in Canada. The clean electricity regulations are an important step, but there is a lot more to do, and there is no time to waste. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Well, at this time, I'd like to invite Evan Pivnick to deliver some brief remarks.
Hi there. Thank you so much. My name's Evan Pivnick. I'm the Clean Energy Program Manager for Clean Energy Canada. We're a think tank operating out of SFU. We engage governments, industries right across the country, working to accelerate the clean energy transition. Really grateful for the opportunity today to share a few remarks about just how important today is. For over a decade, Clean Energy Canada has been working towards a moment like this, one where a government finally centers the critical importance of clean electricity and for the future of our country. Its importance to industries and our competitiveness, to affordability and energy security, and to our climate efforts. Globally, July saw the hottest average temperatures across the world. By mid-month in 2023, had already set the record in BC, the province I call home, as the worst wildfire season in the province's history. For context, the next 3 worst wildfire years were 2018, 2017, and 2021. This isn't a new normal we should accept. It's one that demands a response. We really can't afford to find out just how high the costs of inaction could climb. This is a big part of why I'm so proud and so hopeful to be here today in support of the historic action this government is taking on clean electricity. The evidence is clear. Any country or province that is serious about climate action must start with their electricity sector. We titled one of Clean Energy Canada's recent reports on clean electricity "Underneath It All" for this very reason. Clean electricity is the foundation upon which the entire clean energy transition happens. Cleaner cars, cleaner industries, cleaner homes, all of it needs and is powered by clean electricity. No government can credibly say they are working towards a net zero economy by 2050 while blindly opposing a 2035 target for clean electricity. One foot needs to go before the other. Canada isn't acting alone here. Every G7 country, including Canada, has set the goal of achieving a clean electricity grid by 2035. And our friends in the US are investing hundreds of billions of dollars to ensure that it happens. As mentioned, big companies like Volkswagen are citing clean electricity as the key reason why they're investing in Canada, why they're creating jobs here, why they're putting their investments here. And this isn't just the auto sector. It's steel in Hamilton. It's the battery supply chain in Quebec and across the rest of Canada. It's solar manufacturing in Manitoba. It's green hydrogen in the Maritimes and Nova Scotia. Clean electricity is a key competitive advantage for our country. With over 80% of our electricity grid already being non-emitting, it's one where we have a head start, but we really can't afford to be complacent. As more industries, households, and cars plug into the grid, it will need to grow significantly. Our peers aren't waiting for us. They're working to seize these investments and the opportunities that clean electricity provides. We need to be as well. Ultimately, it's going to be Canadians that stand to benefit the most. From heating our homes to charging our cars, clean electricity will put us on a path where families spend less on energy with greater security than ever before. The work is far from done. Today's announcement, though, is more than just a symbolic step forward. It's a real example of moving from words to actions for families, for the economy, and for the climate. Thank you so much.
So this concludes the formal portion of the announcement. We will now begin media Q&As with Oliver Anderson, Director of Communications to Minister Guilbeault, taking charge from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'm just going to do this from the back. You can all look at me if you like. But bonjour tout le monde. Alors maintenant, on va procéder à les périodes de questions et réponses avec les médias. So we'll proceed now to the Q&A with media. We'll start with any media who are in the room. I see we have a lot of cameras available, but I'm not sure if there are any journalists who, oh, hi there. And if you would just like to introduce yourself and your outlet, and you have one question, one follow-up, and I'll hand you the microphone.
Bonjour, bonjour, Yasmine Mehdi, Radio-Canada. D'abord, par rapport au projet de site d'enfouissement radioactif à Chalk River, on a entendu les Premières Nations algonquines rejeter la proposition à nouveau, demander à votre gouvernement de complètement abandonner le projet. Je me demande ce que vous répondez à leurs inquiétudes environnementales. Puis je sais que le processus est encore en cours, mais est-ce que vous comprenez ces communautés d'avoir des inquiétudes?
En fait, je tiens juste à préciser que ce processus-là est piloté par le ministère de l'Énergie et des Ressources naturelles et non pas par Environnement et Changement climatique Canada. Donc, l'évaluation environnementale, les consultations sont faites par le ministère de mon collègue, le ministre Wilkinson. Donc, très heureux de vous mettre en contact avec les gens dans son bureau pour avoir de plus en plus d'informations là-dessus.
Mais c'est quand même des préoccupations environnementales. Je comprends que ce n'est pas vous qui êtes impliqué dans le processus, mais est-ce que justement vous comprenez les communautés autochtones non seulement d'avoir des inquiétudes environnementales, mais de ne pas se sentir écoutés par votre gouvernement?
Comme mon ministère et moi-même ne sommes pas impliqués directement dans tout le processus d'évaluation et dans les consultations, c'est difficile pour moi de répondre à une question sur un dossier sur lequel je n'ai pas été impliqué.
Je veux vous poser une question aussi sur la ceinture de verdure, puis le rapport de la vérificatrice générale en Ontario hier. D'abord, comment vous réagissez à ces conclusions sur la gestion du gouvernement Ford, les répercussions environnementales, agricoles, puis est-ce que votre gouvernement pourrait finalement réagir pour protéger la ceinture de verdure?
Je n'ai hélas pas eu l'occasion de lire le rapport de la vérificatrice générale. Comme vous pouvez l'imaginer, l'équipe et moi travaillons d'arrache-pied depuis des mois sur l'annonce de ce matin sur le réseau électrique carboneux d'ici 2035. Je suis certain que ce soit au ministère de l'Environnement, l'Agence d'évaluation environnementale ou Parc Canada vont prendre connaissance du rapport de la vérificatrice générale et s'il y a des éléments qui sont pertinents quant à l'implication du fédéral, nous allons étudier tout ça de très près. Vous me demandez est-ce qu'on n'envisage pas déjà d'intervenir? Nous le faisons avec le projet d'évaluation d'impact potentiel sur le parc de la Rouge. Donc, l'Agence d'évaluation environnementale et Parc Canada vont lancer un processus de consultation publique et d'évaluation environnementale sur les répercussions possibles sur le parc de la Rouge.
In English, please, if we could just get your reaction to the report in English.
In English, I have not had the opportunity to read the Auditor General's report. As you can imagine, the team and I have been hard at work to land the Clean Electricity Regulations announcement today. I imagine that the civil servant at Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Impact Assessment Agency, or Parks Canada will be looking at the report, and if there are elements that are pertinent to the federal government in terms of environmental impact, we will be looking at those very closely. And we've already launched, the Impact Assessment Agency and Parks Canada will be launching consultations, public consultations, and an environmental impact assessment of potential impact on the Rouge National Park from development that would be happening around the park. So we're already involved in looking at potential impacts of this. Thank you.
Merci, thank you very much for the question. I'll just take another opportunity if there are any other questions from the room before we move to the online segment. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres questions du salle ici? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll pass it over to Nicole, our moderator online. So let's just make sure the AV is working.
Hello, my name is Nicole and I'll be moderating the online portion of the media availability. We ask that you make sure your name and your media outlet are clearly identified in your Zoom name. Please use the hand raising function if you have a question. We ask that you keep to one question and one follow-up. To ask your question by phone, please press *9 followed by *6 to unmute yourself. Bonjour, mon nom est Nicole et je serai la modératrice pour la portion en ligne pendant le point de presse. On vous demande de vous assurer que votre nom et votre média soient clairement identifiés dans votre nom Zoom. Veuillez utiliser la fonction « Levez la main » si vous avez une question. Si nous vous demandons de vous en tenir à une question et à une question de suivi. Si vous avez une question sur votre téléphone, veuillez appuyer étoile 9 suivi par étoile 6 pour établir le son. So our first question is from Marina von Stackelberg from CBC News.
Hi there. My first question is, these regulations are about creating a net zero grid by 2035, but if I understand correctly, electrical providers don't have to they only have to start beginning to comply at 2035. So how does this make us net zero by 2035?
So you are correct. The entry into force of these regulations will be January 1st, 2035. The reason we're announcing this 12 years ahead of this deadline is to give investors, utilities, public or private, provinces, territories, lead time to do the necessary investment and build out the grid so that by 2035, our grid is carbon neutral, is net zero.
Some provinces and territories have raised concerns about these regulations, that it will drive up power bills or risk their electrical grid. So how are you addressing these concerns?
We've conducted dozens and dozens, probably in the hundreds really, of consultations over the last year with experts, utilities, provinces, environmental organization experts. And I think what we've designed achieves three things. It ensures that by 2035 we have a net zero grid, but it ensures we do that in a way that is affordable for Canadians, and that ensures that we have a reliable grid in 2035 and obviously beyond that. So we are providing flexibility mechanisms because we understand that Canada, as I said, is a big country. The reality is different, certainly from an electrical perspective in different regions and different jurisdictions. So we certainly account for that. But I think the signal that we're sending, and that's one thing we've heard from investors, from energy companies, is tell us what the rules are, and we will comply with them. I was in Calgary just 3 weeks ago, and that basically what was the meeting I had with a number of representatives from the industry there. And that's true all across the country. They want to know what the rules of the games will be, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're giving them a lot of time to prepare for that, the 12 years, and hence the announcement today, although the regulations will only come into force 12 years from now.
La prochaine question est le rapport de Anne-Caroline Desplanques, le Journal de Montréal.
Oui, bonjour, merci de prendre nos questions. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Si.
Monsieur Guilbeault, ma question porte sur, vous avez mentionné plusieurs fois dans votre discours d'ouverture des interconnexions régionales. Il était aussi question de la boucle de l'Atlantique lors du briefing technique ce matin. Donc, ce que je comprends, c'est que vous voulez que les provinces qui produisent déjà de l'énergie propre soient davantage capables de l'exporter à leurs voisines. Par contre, au Québec, où l'énergie est déjà propre, le problème n'est pas de décarboniser, mais d'en produire davantage. On manque d'énergie, la croissance va plus vite que ce qu'on est capable de produire. Alors, qu'est-ce que votre annonce de ce matin vient faire pour aider sur cet enjeu-là, sur la demande croissante d'électricité?
Nous avons eu plusieurs conversations également avec le gouvernement du Québec sur cette question-là. Et comme vous le savez probablement, le gouvernement du Québec est très intéressé dans des discussions en termes d'interconnexion. Le premier ministre Legault était à Terre-Neuve il n'y a pas si longtemps que ça pour discuter avec le premier ministre Fury des possibilités de partenariat entre Terre-Neuve et le Québec. Le Québec est aussi très intéressé par les discussions sur la boucle de l'Atlantique. Mais comme je l'expliquais en introduction, il y a évidemment le règlement, le projet de règlement que je présente ce matin, mais nous avons aussi proposé dans le cadre du dernier budget des investissements de plus de 40 milliards de dollars, des investissements dont le gouvernement du Québec et Hydro-Québec pourront bénéficier dans le cadre de nouveaux projets de production d'électricité propre. Alors, il y en a pour le Québec aussi dans ce que nous proposons aujourd'hui.
Oui, allô. En suivi, Monsieur Sebia, le nouveau PDG de Hydro-Québec, a lancé une étude concernant Gentilly 2 pour une éventuelle relance du nucléaire au Québec. Comment est-ce que le nucléaire se positionne face à ce nouveau règlement-là?
Si vous regardez la façon dont nous proposons de mettre en place ce règlement sur l'électricité propre, le gouvernement fédéral n'a pas de préférence technologique en termes de technologie non émettrice. Contrairement, si on me demande quelle serait la différence, par exemple, entre le règlement que propose le Canada versus les États-Unis sont beaucoup plus prescriptifs en termes de type de technologie à utiliser. Nous, au fédéral, on ne dicte pas aux provinces ou aux territoires quel type de technologie non émettrice ils doivent utiliser. C'est aux provinces et aux territoires de décider. Évidemment, la production d'électricité devra se conformer au règlement à partir de 2035, mais dans la mesure où on investit dans des formes de production d'énergie non émettrice, pour le gouvernement fédéral, c'est ce qui compte.
The next question comes from Turia Isri, Global News.
Good morning. My question is for Minister Guilbeault. $400 billion is a lot of money to upgrade infrastructure to, to make this plan realistic. So how can you ensure the provinces will actually spend what is needed?
I just want to clarify that $400 billion is the investment that utilities in provinces and territories will need to do to improve the grid and to ensure that the grid will respond to growing demands for electricity as people electrify their vehicles, as industry electrify their industrial processes. So it's not what the regulations will impose, not at all. What we're saying is that we want to work with utilities, with investors, with provinces and territories and Indigenous peoples to ensure that those investments that are done in electricity production in Canada between now and 2035 maximize the use of clean energy, like hydrogen, for example, and battery storage, renewable energy like solar and wind, and minimize the use of fossil fuels on the grid. So what we're talking about is not a fossil fuel-free grid by 2035. It's a net zero grid by 2035. We understand that there will be some fossil fuels remaining on the grid in 2035, but we're working to minimize those, and the fossil fuels that will be used post-2035 will have to comply with rigorous environmental and emission standards.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do. You had said that Canadians will spend less money on energy, but even with the current rebates we have for electric vehicles, EVs are still too expensive and out of reach for many Canadians. So what more can the federal government do to make it easier to purchase electric vehicles as we move towards this greener grid?
The first thing I'd like to say is that we are seeing a rapid adoption of EVs by Canadians. That number has doubled over the last few years. We're almost at 10%. I've presented draft regulations in December to ensure that car companies sell more and more zero-emission vehicles, at least 20% by 2026, 60% by 2030, and 100% for light-duty vehicles by 2035. So we're using both incentives and regulations to ensure that we achieve our goals, which are both environmental goals, the economic development goals, as the Canadian auto sector is transforming itself to go EV, and as more and more investment are done in the EV supply chain in Canada, battery production, various battery components that are being or will be built in Canada in the coming years.
La prochaine question est de la part de Émilie Bergeron, La Presse canadienne.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Guilbeault. Pourquoi avoir décidé de ne pas prescrire des technologies en particulier? Est-ce que c'était pour... parce que vous avez parlé dans vos remarques d'introduction des bienfaits de l'éolien, par exemple. Alors, pourquoi avoir fait ce choix de laisser la voie libre aux provinces et de ne pas suggérer de technologie en particulier?
Je vous dirais que de façon générale, notre approche en matière de réglementation tend à être technologiquement neutre. C'est vrai pour le règlement sur l'électricité, mais si vous regardez plusieurs autres règlements que le gouvernement fédéral a mis de l'avant, on a tendance à ne pas prescrire aux entreprises voici la façon dont vous devez le faire. On leur donne des objectifs en matière de réduction de la pollution, que ce soit pollution de l'air, pollution de l'eau ou encore émissions de gaz à effet de serre, et on leur dit à vous de trouver la meilleure façon d'y arriver. C'est une approche que nous prenons depuis très longtemps au Canada et ça s'inscrit dans je dirais même une tradition canadienne de développement de la réglementation.
Et concernant cette possibilité, concernant la centrale Gentilly 2, je comprends que vous ne voulez pas prescrire si le nucléaire doit faire partie de la solution ou pas, mais est-ce que vous avez personnellement des préoccupations par rapport à ça?
Comme je le disais plus tôt, ce que nous cherchons à faire avec ce règlement-là et les investissements fédéraux, c'est de maximiser l'utilisation de technologies non émettrices. Donc, l'objectif du règlement, c'est que le réseau électrique soit carboneutre d'ici 2035. Alors, certaines juridictions, on est en Ontario, par exemple, où on utilise déjà beaucoup le nucléaire pour la production d'électricité. Donc, certaines juridictions vont décider de continuer peut-être d'utiliser le nucléaire. On voit, par exemple, qu'au Canada, présentement, les formes de production d'électricité les moins coûteuses, ce sont le solaire et l'éolien. L'opérateur des marchés albertain vient tout juste de rendre public un rapport qui montre qu'au cours des derniers mois, grâce à l'éolien et au solaire, les prix d'électricité ont diminué en Alberta. Alors, mais encore une fois, c'est pas au gouvernement fédéral de dire aux provinces ou aux compagnies d'électricité, publiques ou privées, quel type d'énergie elles doivent utiliser pour se conformer à cette réglementation-là. C'est vraiment aux provinces et aux territoires de décider comment elles vont le faire.
Our next question is from Davis Legree, iPolitics.
Hi, Minister Guilbeault. I'm just interested in the 70-day formal comment period. I'm just curious, can you give an example of what kind of negative or positive feedback, I suppose, would be required to warrant changes if several provinces voiced concerns during this comment period? What kind of level of feedback would be required to merit considering any changes?
This is common practice for the federal government when we present new regulations. I was speaking earlier about the zero vehicle emission mandate that we've presented draft regulations for in December. So we're consulting with provinces, territories, the auto sector, experts, NGOs. The same will apply to this piece of regulation. This is standard procedure for the federal government. We will be listening to what different actors are proposing in terms of potential changes, and then we will come up later on with the final regulations.
Great, thanks. The follow-up, just it may have been asked in French already, but the CNSC is holding hearings today on a nuclear waste storage facility at Chalk River that several Indigenous communities have voiced their opposition to. Just wondering if you have any comment on the project.
As I was telling your colleague in French earlier, this is not a project that has been studied or where the public consultations have been done by Environment Canada. These are done by the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. So I can't comment because I simply don't have the details on the project.
Our next question is from Laura Osman.
Good morning, Minister. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Wonderful. I wanted to ask you about some of the flexibilities that have been built into this regulations, for example, for remote communities. For how long do you expect these flexibilities to exist, or are they also expected to be phased out over time?
So as you know, the regulation is for January 1st, 2035. We are actively engaged with territories and different, and I say we, that's as much Environment and Climate Change as it is Natural Resources Canada and a number of other federal departments to see how we can work together to help them reduce and potentially eventually eliminate their dependencies on fossil fuels. We understand we're not there yet, which is why we've decided to ensure that the regulations wouldn't apply to them now.
And is there a timeline for when they would apply, or is there a goal at least in terms of transitioning some of these communities, particularly First Nations, onto renewables?
Actually, there's a number of projects that are actively being pursued right now. We're having conversations with a number of the territories to see how we can support projects that would help them reduce their dependencies on fossil fuels. So we're not waiting 2035 to do that. We're actively engaged with many of them on a number of projects as we speak.
Our next question is from Allison Gakad, Carbon Pulse.
Good morning, Minister. I'd like to ask regarding compliance options in the CER. Last year's discussion paper noted that your ministry was considering allowing companies to purchase or generate high quality offsets or pay an amount corresponding to the federal carbon price. There's some mention of it in kind of the baseline scenario in the draft regulations, but I'd love to hear your thoughts moving forward.
Well, as I said earlier, what we're proposing are regulations to ensure that we have a net zero grid by 2035, so it's not a fossil fuel free grid. We understand that there will be some remaining fossil fuels left in 2035. The goal of the regulation is really to send a signal now to investors, to utilities, provinces, territories, that come 2035, these will be the rules for electricity generation. If you're still using fossil fuels, those fossil fuels unit will have to comply with environment and climate change standards. We are looking at some options in terms of compliance. You talked about offsets. Certainly Canada, as part of our 2030 plan, we've not decided whether or not as a country we would be making use of Article 6 Paris Agreement international credits. This is something we may do. We are in the process, the ministry is in the process of developing offset protocols for certain sectors. We already have one for landfills. We're working on others as well. So these would be possibilities for companies to use. These are things that will need to be defined as we move towards final regulations.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Palak Mangat, Parliament Today.
Hi, Minister. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks for taking our questions. Your department says through these regulations that the role of fossil fuel production past 2035 will be, quote, ongoing but limited. And I've heard you talk today about, the need to, I think the term you used was ease up on the gas pedal on these types of production. You've said that it won't be a fossil fuel grid by 2035. I would like to know, how do you personally square that with the longstanding calls to, I guess, slam the brakes entirely on that type of production?
I think as I said, what we're trying to do is we are working to tackle climate change. And if you look at Canada's performance, I don't think anyone in this room, in the audience, or anyone who's listening, 10 years ago would have believed that Canada could be the best performing country of all G7 nations when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Yet here we are for the last 2 years in a row. Canada has outperformed all the other G7 countries when it comes to tackling climate change. But we know that what we're doing is not enough, because what we're doing leads to the type of summer we've seen in Canada in terms of climate impact and all around the world. So we need to do more. And this announcement this morning will help Canada do substantially more in terms of tackling climate pollutions. It's hundreds of millions of tons of pollution that won't make it into the atmosphere because of this regulation. At the same time, we also know that we have to ensure that the grid continues to be reliable comes January 1st, 2035 and beyond. That's important for all Canadians. That's important for our economic sector. That's important for our health sector. So we need to ensure that we can achieve that. And also that the grid remains, or electricity remains, affordable for Canadians. So we're pursuing three goals as we've been pursuing three goals as we've developed this regulations. So we are moving towards far less fossil fuels on our grid in 2035 compared to now. And as I said earlier, this is what our peers in the G7 are doing as well. If you look at the regs that we're presenting today and you compare them with what the EPA presented at the end of May, they're very similar in terms of the goals and what we're trying to achieve. And the same could be true of other G7 nations.
Our next question is from.
Sorry, can I get a follow-up?
Oh, yes, apologies.
No problem. It's a follow-up to my previous, my colleague Laura Osmond's question. I didn't hear any type of timeline on the flexibilities that are baked into the regulations or targets for helping communities transition entirely to renewables. So how do you respond to worries that those flexibilities could single out some regions that may not be pulling their weight on broader climate goals down the road?
You have to realize that when we're talking about off-grid, it is, in terms of the overall emissions, a very, very small portion of the emissions of the electricity sector. So I'm not saying that there will never be anything, but right now we're not in a position to put a timeline for that, because we feel there's much more work that needs to be done with territories and companies in those territories to get to a grid that is fossil fuel free or net zero, and we're not there, so we can't put a timeline. But in terms of the overall emissions of the electricity sector, it is very marginal.
Our next question is from a reporter joining us by phone. Please state your full name and media outlet before asking your question. To ask your question by phone, please press *9, followed by *6 to unmute yourself. Oh, okay, perfect. Nous avons une question de suivi de Anne-Caroline Desplanques.
Ah non, c'est une erreur, désolée.
Parfait, merci. Please use the hand raising function if you have a question. Veuillez utiliser la fonction lever la main si vous avez une question. So if there are no further questions, this concludes today's event. Thank you for joining us today. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse aujourd'hui. Merci pour votre participation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience. Have a good rest of conference. Merci beaucoup.